We know that the snake is utilized conceptually and metaphorically as representation of transformation, right? Because the snake is something that can shed its skin and be reborn. We know that a snake is something that's innately attractive and terrifying to human beings and other primates, so that if you come across a snake, you're likely to be at least startled, if not horrified by it, but also attracted to it in a way that is underneath your voluntary consciousness, right? Because snakes attract orienting reflexes, and they activate the systems underneath your consciousness that actually govern the structure of that consciousness. We know that the snake can be well represented as well as internal chaos. So imagine this, imagine that it's not unreasonable for a self-conscious mind searching for a mode of self-representation to remark on the parallels between the structure of the snake and the spine and the brain, given that a snake is essentially a spine with a brain. And then imagine as well that the most archaic aspects of our nervous system, those that govern novelty and orienting and anxiety responses, are in fact precisely those that were described by MacLean as nested inside the reptilian brain. And then imagine, along with the Hindu yogis, that the purpose of Kundalini yoga is to activate the circuitry that's associated with that snake, so to speak, to produce a permanent state of alert wakefulness that's associated with consciousness. So imagine this, imagine an animal like a zebra grazing mindlessly in the herd with no consciousness whatsoever, and then imagine its relatively undeveloped cortical structures activated suddenly by the movement of a lion off in the perimeter. And then imagine for that brief moment that that zebra is actually conscious, a state that requires a tremendous amount of energy and difficult to maintain. But because the threat and the uncertainty manifest itself within the zebra's mode of consciousness, it wakes momentarily. And then imagine that human beings are like that zebra always. Because we've become self-conscious, because we know that the unknown is around us all the time, even when we think we're safe, we're never safe. Imagine that the reason we're so conscious is because, as a consequence of our discovery of the possibility of our own mortality, all this underlying circuitry that in other animals is only apparent when they're startled or afraid or interested or curious, in human beings it's on all the time. And that's what makes us conscious. And the reason for that is because we developed enough cortical elaboration to note that we're always threatened by everything that's around us. And then imagine that, well, that's pretty awful, isn't it? Because it's at the basis of all our innate existential terror. But then imagine as well that without that terror pushing us forward and our constant reference to the dangerous aspect of the unknown, we would have never been motivated to produce the kind of societies that we've produced, which are essentially very remarkably elaborated devices that enable us to find some protection from that unknown and to manipulate it effectively. And then, remembering that story, we'll return to Genesis. Jung says the snake was regarded by early Gnostic Christians as a kind of deity whose faculties were more developed and advanced than the original deity that actually structured the world. The idea there being that the world initially was a pretty dismal place. Everyone wasn't conscious, we all existed at the level of the animal, and then the snake came along and said, wake up, wake up. And the movement from that state of unself-consciousness paradise to this profane state of awakening can be regarded not so much as a descent, but as an ascent of sorts, even though a painful one. And then you have Goethe's commentary from Mephistopheles, his representation of Satan and his capacity for temptation, who says, follow the adage of my cousin Snake. From dreams of godlike knowledge you will wake to fear in which your very soul shall quake. A statement associating the human tendency to attribute to all revolutionary sources of new information a kind of demonic being. And then you have the problem of the woman. Now we know that within the context of the Judeo-Christian tradition, women have unduly suffered for their role in tempting humanity in the embodied form of Adam, towards higher order self-consciousness. And then you think, well, let's just take a look at how human beings and their mating relationships differ from those of other animals, like chimpanzees, to whom we are very closely genetically related. And if you look at the mating strategies of female chimpanzees, you see that they really don't care who they sleep with, so to speak. Any old chimpanzee will do. Now, the less dominant male chimps tend to be chased away by the more dominant male chimps, but if a female and less dominant chimp can get the hell away from the watchful gaze of the dominance hierarchy, they're perfectly happy to mate. Human females are not like that. They're selective maters, and there's a tremendous body of evolutionary psychological information that suggests that although both genders value intelligence and physical appearance, females value the ability to attain dominance hierarchy status in men far more than men admire the ability to attain dominance status in women, which is to say that men don't care what a woman has with regards to potential for attaining status, whereas with women it's one of the strong determinants of mating preference. So then let's say, look, we don't know why the hell our cortex has expanded so rapidly somewhere between 5 and 3 million years ago. Let's offer this as a hypothesis. The women started to get choosy, and because they were so damn complicated, the whole human species had to exaggerate its cortical growth prior to any even use for that cortical growth, just so that the men had an even hand in the competition, right? So women put tremendous selection pressure on the human being to develop tremendous cortical expansion. Now, we already know that from the mythological perspective that women are frequently cast into the same conceptual domain, the temptress domain, as the benevolent aspect of the unknown. And we know as well from representations of hero mythology that it is the individual who goes out to confront chaos who's most likely to free from the dragon not only treasure but a virgin, say in the case of mythological representations like St. George and the dragon.